I never imagined myself holding a gun or living in the shadows of society. But life is cruel, and sometimes you have to do things you never thought you would. My name is Ken, I'm 24 years old, and this is the story of how I ended up in the Mafia. It all started with my younger brother, Raymond. He's 17, full of dreams, and in his final year of high school. Since we lost our parents in a car accident 5 years ago, I've been his only family. I'd do anything for my brother, even if it meant taking jobs that pushed me to my limits. At first, I worked at a casino. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to keep Ray in school and put food on our table. One evening, while cleaning up after a rowdy group of gamblers, the atmosphere in the casino changed. The air grew tense as the doors slammed open. A group of men in tailored suits walked in. "Where is your boss?" The leader, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a scar down his cheek, asked. Our boss, Mr. Takeda, stumbled out of his office sweating. I ducked behind the bar, eavesdropping as they spoke. "You owe us 10 million yen. Takeda," the scarred man said, leaning against the table like he owned the place. "But we're generous. Instead of cash, you'll send 2 of your strongest guys to help us with an operation." Takeda's beady eyes scanned the room. "Ken, get over here." I froze. "Yes, come over here." He grabbed another unlucky staff member, Hiro. "Both of you will go. Do a good job and you'll get paid handsomely." I wanted to refuse. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but the thought of money for my brother's school fees silenced my doubts. I agreed to it and we all left that night to practice. The operation turned out to be a high-stakes warehouse heist. My heart pounded as I crouched behind crates. This isn't what I signed up for. I might even end up dying if anything goes wrong. I muttered under my breath. We pulled off the operation in no time. And by the end of the night, I was holding an envelope thick with cash. "You did well," Kino, the leader of the gang, said as he lit a cigarette, his gaze lingering on me a little longer than necessary. He asked me if I would like to join them for other operations. I didn't answer. The adrenaline still buzzed in my veins and I needed time to think. Hiro was quick to speak. "If it will bring me more money, then I'm in." Kino smirked. "Smart man. What about you, Ken?" I hesitated. "Can I take a day? I need to talk to my brother." Kino was quiet for a minute and finally allowed me to go back home. When I got home that night, my brother Ray was still awake, studying at the kitchen table. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Ken, you're late. Have you eaten?" I ruffled his hair. "I'm fine, just tired." But he saw the exhaustion in my eyes. "What's wrong?" I sighed, sitting across from him. "I got a new job. It pays well, but I might be away for a while." His brow furrowed. "What kind of job?" "Security work." I lied. "It's dangerous, but it's temporary. I'm doing this for you, Ray, so you can focus on your studies." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Just don't get hurt, okay?" The next day I called Kino. "I'm in. Where can we meet?" After saying goodbye to Ray and assuring him I'd call whenever I could, I was emailed the location of the mansion. It was a huge building in a quiet part of town. Inside, however, was filled with activities. Men were counting money, others cleaning weapons, and a few discussing about their next operation. Hiro waved me over as soon as he saw me. "You're just in time. We're meeting the big boss today." "Big boss?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, the head of everything. And his son too." I swallowed hard. I'd never met a mafia boss before, let alone one running an entire organization. The thought of it made my palms sweat. We were led into a grand, dimly lit room. A heavy oak desk dominated the space, behind which sat an older man with sharp, piercing eyes and a gray beard that gave him an air of wisdom. His suit was impeccable, and the sheer authority he exuded made the room feel smaller. This was the boss, Mr. Yamada. Standing beside him was a younger man, which I assumed was his son. He was very handsome, tall, probably 6 feet, with brown hair slicked back. But it wasn't just his looks that were intimidating. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned the room without even trying. He didn't smile and his gaze was as cold as steel. "Kino, you've brought them?" Mr. Yamada's voice was calm but firm. "Yes, sir." Kino stepped forward, motioning for Hiro and me to follow. "These are the new recruits from the casino. They've proven themselves useful. Mr. Yamada studied us for a moment before nodding. Loyalty is the most valuable in this business. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Hiro and I said in unison, though my voice cracked slightly. Chris's eyes locked onto me and I swear my heart skipped a beat. There was something magnetic about him, even though he didn't say a word. This is my son Chris. Mr. Yamada continued. He oversees most of our operations. You'll report to him directly. Chris didn't say anything. He just nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. But as his gaze lingered on me for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, I felt my cheeks heat up. Get it together, Ken. I scolded myself. This is not the time to have a crush on the most dangerous guy in the room. After the meeting, Hiro and I were shown around the mansion by Kino. Stay out of way unless he calls for you. Kino warned. He doesn't tolerate nonsense. I noticed. I muttered, earning a chuckle from Hiro. Later that evening, we were assigned our first job under Chris's command. It was a simple delivery, but the way he explained it made it sound like a military operation. If anything goes wrong, you call me. Understood? Yes, sir. I said, trying not to sound too nervous. The job went smoothly, and when we returned to the mansion, Chris was waiting for us. Good work, he said curtly, handing us each an envelope of cash. Thanks, boss, Hiro said, grinning. I just nodded, my brain short-circuiting as Chris's hand brushed mine when he gave me the envelope. I bowed in appreciation and he walked away. It was nearly midnight when Kino met me in the hallway. Hey, Ken, he said in a low voice, tossing me a small black package. Take this to young master's room. The big boss wants it delivered to him tonight. My stomach flipped. Chris's room? At this hour? But I nodded, trying to appear calm. Sure, I'll do it. As I walked down the dimly lit corridor, the package felt heavier with each step. My thoughts raced. What's in this package? What if he's in a bad mood? The last thought made my face heat up. I stopped in front of his door, took a deep breath and knocked softly. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Boss. I called quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. But still no response. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open gently. The room was a bit dark except for the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Chris was sprawled on the bed, fast asleep. Seeing him like this, so peaceful and unguarded, was a stark contrast to his usual cold demeanor. My eyes drifted to his face and my heart skipped a beat. He looks perfect, I thought. His sharp features, softened by sleep, were nothing short of mesmerizing. Carefully I stepped inside and placed the package on his desk. Sir, I whispered, half hoping he'd wake up. The big boss asked me to bring this to you. Still there was no response. I hesitated, my gaze returning to his face. His lips, slightly parted, caught my attention. They were a soft, cherry red, looking so inviting that I could barely tear my eyes away. My pulse quickened. What are you thinking, Ken? I scolded myself. But I couldn't stop. My feet moved on their own, carrying me closer to the bed. I leaned over him, my heart pounding like a drum. His scent, a mix of cologne, filled my senses. My eyes landed on the pistol resting on the nightstand inches from his hand. The sight made my stomach churn. This is a bad idea. A very, very bad idea. But then I looked back at his lips. They seemed to call to me like some forbidden fruit. I swallowed hard, my breath shaky. Just one kiss, I told myself. He won't even notice. I leaned down, my lips brushing against his softly. It was the briefest of kisses, but it sent a jolt through me that left me breathless. Chris moved a bit and my heart nearly stopped. His eyelids fluttered and I bolted like my life depended on it, which, to be fair, it probably did. By the time I reached the hallway, my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my phone. What have I done? I thought. He's going to kill me. No, he's going to torture me first, then kill me. I ran into Kino, who raised an eyebrow at my disheveled state. Are you okay? Yes, I am. I blurted out a little too loudly. The boss was sleeping. So I just dropped the package on his table. Kino smirked. He sleeps like the dead. Lucky you didn't wake him. He'd probably shoot you for the trouble. I laughed nervously, the image of the pistol flashing in my mind. Anyway, I'll go get some rest. All right, see you tomorrow. Kino waved me off, thankfully not pressing further. Back in my room, I collapsed onto the bed, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I groaned, covering my face with a pillow. Why did I do that? Why couldn't I just leave the package and walk away like a normal person? My thoughts spiraled. Did he notice? I glanced at the door, half expecting Chris to burst in with a gun in hand. But the hallway remained silent. After about 20 minutes, I finally had the courage to sleep. The next morning, I was abruptly shaken awake by Hiro, my roommate. "Ken, wake up," he whispered urgently, his voice trembling. "What is it?" I grumbled, barely prying my eyes open. "The young boss wants to see us. All of us." That woke me up instantly. My heart skipped a beat. Chris wants to see us? Panic bubbled inside me. Did he know about the kiss? What does he want? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice cracked. Hiro shrugged, looking just as nervous. "No idea. But he looks very angry." I quickly wore my clothes and went out with Hiro. As we joined the other mafias in the briefing hall, my mind raced. Should I run? Maybe I could sneak out before he gets here. But where would I go? It was pointless. Running wasn't an option, and I'd only make myself look more suspicious. So I followed the others, trying to steady my breathing. Chris stood at the front, arms crossed and a deep scowl on his face. He looked every bit the brutal son of the mafia boss, intimidating, dangerous, and utterly unreadable. When his sharp eyes swept across the room, I looked down, avoiding his gaze. Please don't let it be about last night. I prayed silently within myself. I noticed something last night, Chris said finally, his voice cold and commanding. My stomach dropped. My hands grew clammy. Last night, he continued, pacing slowly. There were no guards outside my room. I nearly collapsed with relief, but my heart was still racing. The room went deathly silent as everyone exchanged nervous glances. Chris stopped pacing and pulled out his pistol, spinning it casually in his hand. Who was supposed to be on duty? The tension in the air was suffocating. Slowly, one by one, several guys stepped forward, their heads hanging low. Chris eyed them coldly, his fingers brushing the trigger. You abandoned your post? His voice was icy, and even I felt a chill despite not being one of the guards. We didn't mean to, sir. One of them stammered, trying to explain further. Chris raised a hand to silence him. Save your excuses. Everyone braced themselves, expecting the worst. Chris's punishments were known to be harsh. You're all going to bathe, Chris declared suddenly, a smirk tugging at his lips. The room went silent for a moment, the mafias exchanging confused looks. Bathe? One of them asked hesitantly. Outside. Right now. And I'll be watching. Although you can keep your boxers, Chris said. The guards groaned but didn't dare protest. They trudged to the open courtyard, where buckets of cold water awaited them. Chris leaned against a chair, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. One by one, the guards began pouring water over themselves, shivering in the chilly morning air. Chris chuckled, and to my surprise it was a genuine laugh, a rare sound coming from him. Hey, you missed a spot, he called out, pointing at one of the guards who was half-heartedly splashing himself. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. It was bizarre watching these hardened mafias being forced to bathe like scolded kids. But then I caught Chris's eyes on me. His smirk turned into something else, something darker and more mischievous. His gaze sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickly looked away, my face heating up. When it was finally over, the guards trudged back inside, dripping wet and grumbling under their breath. Chris stayed behind, still smirking as he watched them leave. Back in my room, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Why did he do that? I muttered to myself. Hiro, drying his hair with a towel, shrugged. The boss is unpredictable. He likes messing with people sometimes. But making them bathe in front of him? That's just weird. Yeah, but you saw his face. He was enjoying every second of it. Hiro chuckled. Maybe he's not as cold-hearted as everyone thinks. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the way he looked at me in the courtyard. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought lingered in my mind. Did he really not notice that I kissed him? At least I felt a sense of relief. A few days later, a luxurious black car rolled into the compound. Its polished exterior gleamed in the sunlight, immediately drawing everyone's attention. A tall, elegant man stepped out, dressed in a crisp designer suit. He looked calm and rich as if the world revolved around him. The mafias around me began whispering. "That is him," one of them said, nudging another. "The young boss boyfriend," another whispered with a smirk. I raised an eyebrow, trying to process their words. "Boyfriend? Chris has a boyfriend?" I asked, surprised. The guy next to me snorted. "Yeah, he comes over to spend weekends sometimes." Surprised? Don't be. Even someone like Chris has someone to care for him. I glanced toward the car again, watching as the man made his way inside. It was hard to imagine. Chris, who barely spoke to anyone unless it was to bark orders, didn't seem like the type to have a soft side to love someone. Later that evening, I was tasked with bringing wine to Chris's room for his guest. I knocked lightly before pushing the door open. The elegant man was sitting on the couch, leaning against Chris. His hand rested on Chris's chest, tracing slow, teasing circles. "Relax, Chris," he said, his voice smooth and flirtatious. "You're always so tense." Chris leaned back, his expression calm but uninterested. He wasn't pushing the guy away, but he also wasn't reciprocating. I froze in the doorway, my grip tightening on the tray I was carrying. My chest felt heavy and I quickly stepped forward, pouring the wine into their glasses. Chris glanced at me briefly, his expression unreadable. I kept my head down, finishing the task as quickly as possible. "Here's the wine, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The guy on the couch chuckled, noticing my flustered state. "You're new, aren't you?" he asked, his tone amused. I nodded stiffly and hurried out of the room, my cheeks burning. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face as I tried to calm down. I leaned against the wall, pulling out a cigarette. What's wrong with me? It's none of my business who Chris is with. But no matter how much I told myself that, the image of that guy touching Chris lingered in my mind. Smoking again? Hyro's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see him walking over with a small bag of snacks in his hand. "Yeah," I muttered, taking a drag. Hyro sat beside me, opening the bag and offering me some chips. "You should really quit, you know. It's bad for your health." I chuckled, taking one of the chips. "You sound like my mom." Hyro laughed softly but then hesitated. "Ken, are you okay? You've been acting strange since that guy arrived." I glanced at him, surprised. "No, I'm fine. Just tired." Hyro didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push further. Instead, he shifted closer, his voice dropping slightly. "Ken, can I tell you something?" That night, back in our room, Hyro finally worked up the courage to say what was on his mind. "I like you," he admitted, his cheeks turning red. "I mean, not just as a friend. I've liked you ever since the day you started working at the casino." I stared at him, caught off guard. I cared about Hyro, he was my roommate, my friend, and someone I genuinely trusted. But I didn't have any feelings for him. "Hyro," I began, choosing my words carefully. "You're an amazing guy and I really care about you. But it's more like a brotherly thing, you know?" His face fell, but he quickly masked his disappointment with a small smile. "I get it. Don't worry about it, Ken. I just needed to get it off my chest." We stayed up late that night, talking about our families and past. Hyro told me about his younger sister, and I shared stories about my brother. By the time we drifted off to sleep, the awkward tension between us had faded. Still, as I lay awake in the dark, my thoughts drifted back to Chris and the man in his room, and I suddenly felt a bit jealous. The day the guest left, I was assigned to clean up his room. I wasn't exactly thrilled. It wasn't the first time I'd had to tidy up after someone, but the thought of walking into the room after everything I'd seen made my stomach churn. When I got there, the room was surprisingly neat for someone who'd hosted a guest all weekend. But as I moved closer to the bed, my eyes landed on an open pack of condoms on the floor. I froze, an odd mix of irritation and jealousy washing over me. I picked up the pack, tossing it into the trash bin with more force than necessary. Just as I turned around to grab a cleaning cloth, the door swung open. Chris walked in, his presence filling the room instantly. He was holding a newspaper, his sharp eyes scanning the pages as if the world didn't matter. "Good afternoon, sir," I greeted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He nodded, not even looking up from the paper, and walked over to the sitting area. He sank into a chair, his legs crossed casually, exuding the effortless dominance that made everyone else in the Mafia tread carefully around him. I quickly finished cleaning, trying to keep my movements quiet and swift. But just as I reached the door, Chris's deep voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned slowly. He was still seated, but his piercing eyes were now locked on me. "Come here," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. I walked over, my palms starting to sweat. Chris stood up, towering over me. He set the newspaper aside and crossed his arms. "I've been meaning to ask you something." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. He stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Were you the one who came into my room 3 nights ago?" His voice was quiet, but the weight of his words felt like a thunderclap. My mind raced for an excuse. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. Chris's expression didn't change. Instead, he reached for the pistol holstered at his side, pulling it out with deliberate slowness. My heart stopped. "I'll ask one more time," he said, pressing the cold barrel of the gun lightly against my neck. "Was it you?" I broke. "Yes, it was me," I blurted out, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Please don't shoot me." Chris smirked, lowering the gun. His free hand came up to gently grip my chin, tilting my face up so I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Do you like me, Ken?" he asked, his voice softer now but still laced with danger. I hesitated, my lips trembling. Chris raised the gun again, tilting it playfully. "I won't ask twice." "Yes, I do," I whispered, barely audible. "I like you." His smirk widened, and he stepped even closer, his body nearly pressing against mine. "Interesting," he said. His hand trailed down below, brushing against my trousers. I sucked in a sharp breath as his touch sent an involuntary jolt through me. "Chris, please," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "Relax," he said, clearly enjoying the effect he had on me. "You're lucky, you know." "Lucky?" I stammered. He nodded, leaning in close enough for me to feel his breath on my ear. "If you had bad breath or smelled awful that night, I would have shot you right there." I froze, my mind spinning. He pulled back, his expression unreadable now. "You're quite brave, Ken," he said, his tone almost thoughtful. "None of the others would have dared. But you intrigue me." I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a very, very bad thing. I barely had time to process what was happening when Chris grabbed me by the wrist, pulling me back into the room. His grip was firm but not rough, and before I could even think of protesting, his lips were on mine. For a moment, the world stopped. This wasn't real, was it? The guy I'd admired from afar, whose every word sent chills down my spine, was kissing me. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in one of my wildest dreams. Chris's lips were demanding yet soft, and I couldn't help but melt into the kiss. I hesitated at first, but when he deepened it, I let go of every doubt, every fear, and kissed him back with the same intensity. His hands moved to my shoulders, pushing off my shirt as if to rid of any barrier between us. "You've been on my mind," he murmured against my lips, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. "Chris," I managed to whisper, my voice shaky but filled with longing. He didn't let me finish. Instead, he pulled me closer, his hands roaming my back as if mapping every inch of me. My shirt was gone before I knew it, and Chris's lips trailed down my neck, leaving a fire in their wake. My breaths grew heavier and my heart raced as his touch moved lower. I dared to reciprocate, my trembling hands working to unbutton his shirt. Chris let out a soft chuckle, amused at my nervousness but not stopping me. He was patient, guiding me with a steady confidence that only made my admiration for him grow. "Relax," he whispered, his hands tilting my chin so I had no choice but to look into his eyes. As I lost myself in the intensity of the moment, I knelt down there playing naughty, and Chris seemed to enjoy every bit of it. Chris's lips found mine again, more passionate this time. But just as things were about to escalate, there was a sudden knock at the door. The sound jolted both of us back to reality. Chris let out a frustrated sigh, his forehead resting against mine for a moment. "We're not done," he said, his tone firm but laced with a promise that sent a thrill through me. I scrambled to put my clothes back on, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the buttons. Chris, ever composed, straightened himself up but left his shirt unbuttoned, revealing just enough of his chest to make me want to stay. I opened the door to find Hiro standing there, holding a tray of food. The moment his eyes landed on me, his face fell, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He didn't say a word, but the sadness in his expression was obvious. I slipped past him without meeting his gaze, feeling a pang of guilt for reasons I couldn't quite understand. As I walked down the hallway, I heard Hiro enter Chris's room and the soft clink of the tray being placed on the table. Back in my room, I sat on my bed, my mind racing. Chris wasn't the type to open up or show affection easily. Was this just a fleeting moment for him, or was there something deeper behind his actions? Later that night, I found myself sitting outside, away from the noise and chaos of the house. The cool night air was refreshing, but my mind was anything but calm. I stared at the stars, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My heart was still racing from my encounter with Chris, but Hiro's pained expression earlier kept creeping into my thoughts. The sound of footsteps broke my reverie. I didn't need to look to know it was Hiro. His presence was always distinct, almost comforting. He sat beside me, keeping a short distance, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. "Ken," he started softly. "I know what happened between you and the boss." I tensed, my heart sinking. Hiro sighed. "You don't have to pretend. It's obvious. The way you walked out of his room earlier, I could tell." I said nothing, staring at the ground. There was no point in lying. "Do you love him?" Hiro asked bluntly. The question hit me like a truck. "I think I do." Hiro let out a bitter laugh. "Ken, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Chris isn't someone who can be loved. And if the main boss finds out, you'll be as good as dead." His words sent a chill through me. I hadn't thought that far. I'd been so consumed by my feelings that I forgot the dangerous reality of my situation. My younger brother's face flashed in my mind. He was waiting for me back home, trusting me to provide for him. If something happened to me, he'd be left alone in this world. "You're right," I muttered. "I can't do this. I really need to keep my distance." But just as I was convincing myself to let it go, Hiro turned to me, his expression serious. "Ken, I need you to know something." Before I could ask, Hiro leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like Chris's kiss. This one was desperate, filled with longing and sadness. I remained calm for a minute, too shocked to react. When he pulled back, his eyes were glistening. "I know I'm not like Chris. I'm not as powerful or wealthy as he is, but I care about you. I really do." I stared at him, utterly confused. "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly, forcing a smile. I stood up, needing to escape the suffocating emotions swirling around me. "I'm sorry, Hiro," I said softly before walking away. Back in my room, I collapsed onto my bed, my mind racing. Hiro's words echoed in my head, but my heart still beat for Chris. Yet the danger of being with Chris loomed larger than ever. Was I willing to risk everything for him? Sleep didn't come easily that night, and as I stared at the ceiling, I realized that the path I was walking was only getting more complicated. If you enjoyed this story and want a part 2, kindly like this video, leave a comment and please subscribe to my channel for more BL stories. Thanks for watching.